It started like any other political broadcast, but what came out of Mike Johnson's mouth that day would ignite one of the most talked about comebacks in Congress this year. Mike Johnson, known for his sharp tongue and relentless conservative stance, had built his reputation on being bold, loud, and unapologetically combative. But this time, his confidence would come face to face with someone who wasn't intimidated by power: Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Crockett wasn't new to pressure. She'd faced it her entire career, as a lawyer, as a legislator, and as a woman who never backed down from a fight rooted in arrogance. Calm, articulate, and razor-smart, she carried herself with the kind of composure that didn't need to shout to be heard. Johnson, however, didn't see that coming. In a moment of smug assurance, he threw out a sarcastic remark aimed directly at her. He mocked her law degree, laughing as if intellect needed his validation. He thought it was clever. The audience chuckled, the cameras rolled, and for a brief moment, it seemed like he'd won the exchange. But what he didn't realize was that every word he spoke was being clipped, shared, and dissected online. Within minutes, social media lit up. Twitter threads, Reddit posts, and comment sections all pulsed with the same energy. She won't stay silent for long, because Jasmine Crockett had heard it all. And when she responded, it wouldn't be loud or emotional. It would be precise, deliberate, and devastatingly intelligent. She waited. She watched, and she planned her words like a surgeon preparing for a perfect incision, clean, calm, and lethal. The buzz grew louder. People began tagging her, demanding a response. Clips of Johnson's remark spread across the internet like wildfire. Memes were born, opinions divided, but deep down, everyone knew one thing. Crockett was about to make a move, and when she finally stepped forward, it wasn't just another political moment. It was the calm before the storm, because this wasn't about ego anymore. It was about respect. About what happens when arrogance underestimates intellect. The moment came quietly. No warning, no build-up, no dramatic music. Just Jasmine Crockett sitting across from the man who thought he could humiliate her. It started like any other political broadcast, but what came out of Mike Johnson's mouth that day would ignite one of the most talked about comebacks in Congress this year. Mike Johnson, known for his sharp tongue and relentless conservative stance, had built his reputation on being bold, loud, and unapologetically combative. But this time, his confidence would come face to face with someone who wasn't intimidated by power: Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Crockett wasn't new to pressure. She'd faced it her entire career, as a lawyer, as a legislator, and as a woman who never backed down from a fight rooted in arrogance. Calm, articulate, and razor-smart, she carried herself with the kind of composure that didn't need to shout to be heard. Johnson, however, didn't see that coming. In a moment of smug assurance, he threw out a sarcastic remark aimed directly at her. He mocked her law degree, laughing as if intellect needed his validation. He thought it was clever. The audience chuckled, the cameras rolled, and for a brief moment, it seemed like he'd won the exchange. But what he didn't realize was that every word he spoke was being clipped, shared, and dissected online. Within minutes, social media lit up. Twitter threads, Reddit posts, and comment sections all pulsed with the same energy. She won't stay silent for long, because Jasmine Crockett had heard it all. And when she responded, it wouldn't be loud or emotional. It would be precise, deliberate, and devastatingly intelligent. She waited. She watched, and she planned her words like a surgeon preparing for a perfect incision, clean, calm, and lethal. The buzz grew louder. People began tagging her, demanding a response. Clips of Johnson's remark spread across the internet like wildfire. Memes were born, opinions divided, but deep down, everyone knew one thing. Crockett was about to make a move, and when she finally stepped forward, it wasn't just another political moment. It was the calm before the storm, because this wasn't about ego anymore. It was about respect. About what happens when arrogance underestimates intellect. The moment came quietly. No warning, no build-up, no dramatic music. Just Jasmine Crockett sitting across from the man who thought he could humiliate her. It started like any other political broadcast, but what came out of Mike Johnson's mouth that day would ignite one of the most talked-about comebacks in Congress this year. Mike Johnson, known for his sharp tongue and relentless conservative stance, had built his reputation on being bold, loud, and unapologetically combative. But this time, his confidence would come face to face with someone who wasn't intimidated by power: Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Crockett wasn't new to pressure. She'd faced it her entire career, as a lawyer, as a legislator, and as a woman who never backed down from a fight rooted in arrogance. Calm, articulate, and razor-smart, she carried herself with the kind of composure that didn't need to shout to be heard. Johnson, however, didn't see that coming. In a moment of smug assurance, he threw out a sarcastic remark aimed directly at her. He mocked her law degree, laughing as if intellect needed his validation. He thought it was clever. The audience chuckled, the cameras rolled, and for a brief moment, it seemed like he'd won the exchange. But what he didn't realize was that every word he spoke was being clipped, shared, and dissected online. Within minutes, social media lit up. Twitter threads, Reddit posts, and comment sections all pulsed with the same energy. She won't stay silent for long, because Jasmine Crockett had heard it all. And when she responded, it wouldn't be loud or emotional. It would be precise, deliberate, and devastatingly intelligent. She waited. She watched, and she planned her words like a surgeon preparing for a perfect incision, clean, calm, and lethal. The buzz grew louder. People began tagging her, demanding a response. Clips of Johnson's remark spread across the internet like wildfire. Memes were born, opinions divided, but deep down, everyone knew one thing. Crockett was about to make a move, and when she finally stepped forward, it wasn't just another political moment. It was the calm before the storm, because this wasn't about ego anymore. It was about respect. About what happens when arrogance underestimates intellect. The moment came quietly. No warning, no build-up, no dramatic music. Just Jasmine Crockett sitting across from the man who thought he could humiliate her. Mike Johnson leaned back in his chair, wearing that practiced smirk politicians use when they think they've already won. He started talking again, confidently, carelessly, the kind of confidence that comes from never being challenged by someone who actually knows what they're talking about. He made another dig about her qualifications, another casual dismissal of her education and her experience. He thought he was being funny. He thought it was entertainment, but Crockett didn't interrupt. She let him talk, every word digging his own hole a little deeper. Because silence, when used by someone who knows their power, is more dangerous than any shout. Then she finally spoke. Her voice was calm, clear, and deliberate. "You know, Mike, it's always interesting to me how the loudest men in the room are often the ones who have the least to say." That one line changed the air. Johnson blinked, thrown off for the first time. The audience went still. No laughter this time. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her tone sharp enough to cut through the pretense. "You can question my degree all you want, but what you can't question is the fact that I've used it to defend people who never had a voice, while you've spent years defending your own ego." He tried to respond, but she didn't stop. Her words were rhythmic, surgical, each sentence landing exactly where it needed to. "You don't intimidate me, Mike. I didn't come here to prove myself to someone who mistakes noise for intelligence. I came here to remind you that respect isn't given by titles. It's earned by truth." For a second you could see it, that flicker of realization behind his eyes. The moment a man who's always been the loudest realizes he's finally met someone who doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. And right there, in that quiet but searing exchange, the spark ignited. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just answer back, she rewrote the entire conversation. Mike Johnson didn't take it well. You could see it, that twitch of irritation behind his forced smile. The kind of look men wear when their pride gets bruised, but their ego won't let them admit it. He tried to pivot, tried to act unfazed. He leaned in, voice dripping with condescension. "Congresswoman, maybe you should spend a little less time preaching and a little more time learning how the real world works." The room shifted. You could almost hear the arrogance echo, but Crockett, she didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, a slow smirk forming, not of amusement but of clarity. Her reply was surgical. "Mike, I've been in the real world. I've represented people who've lost everything, jobs, homes, families, because of policies written by men who think exactly like you." His smirk faltered. She continued, calm and deliberate. "And while you were busy giving speeches about values, I was in courtrooms defending them. So tell me again, which one of us needs a reality check?" The tension grew heavy. Every word she spoke hit harder than any shout could, because she wasn't arguing. She was dismantling him piece by piece with logic, poise, and precision. Johnson tried one more time, his tone sharper now. "You're twisting my words, Congresswoman." Crockett leaned forward. Her eyes locked on his, unwavering. "No, Mike, I'm just holding them up to the light. And maybe for the first time, you don't like what you see." The room went still. No interruptions, no laughter. Just silence. It wasn't just a political exchange anymore. It was a power shift. The kind that doesn't need shouting or applause to be felt. And in that silence, Jasmine Crockett owned the moment. Her voice softened, but every syllable carried weight. "You can mock my degree, my background, or my beliefs, but you can't mock results. You can't mock integrity. And you definitely can't mock the truth, not when it's staring you in the face." For the first time, Mike Johnson had nothing to say. Because this wasn't about winning an argument, it was about exposing a mindset, and Jasmine Crockett just turned his arrogance into her evidence. The crowd didn't cheer right away. They didn't need to. Everyone knew exactly what they'd just witnessed. A takedown so effortless, it didn't even look like a fight. For a man who built his entire career on talking, Mike Johnson suddenly had nothing left to say. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows agreement. It was the kind that comes from being exposed. The kind that doesn't need an audience to feel heavy. Jasmine Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any victory speech could ever be. She sat back in her chair, unbothered, composed, while Johnson fumbled through his notes, looking for words that just wouldn't come. Every second of that pause stretched longer than the last. The cameras were rolling, but for once, it wasn't the lens that made him nervous. It was the truth. Crockett's calm presence became the story. Not because she shouted him down, but because she didn't have to. Her restraint, that quiet confidence, said everything. You can't out-talk intelligence. You can't outrun accountability, and you sure can't overpower composure. People in the room shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they were supposed to clap, speak, or just breathe. But Crockett? She didn't move. She let the moment linger, long enough for everyone to realize what had just happened. A powerful man had been silenced. Not by force, not by outrage, but by intellect. And that's the thing about silence. When it comes from power, it doesn't need an explanation. In that quiet aftermath, the story wrote itself. A congresswoman dismissed as unqualified had just dismantled one of Washington's loudest voices without raising hers. That silence wasn't awkward. It was poetic, because sometimes the most savage response isn't a comeback. It's control. And Jasmine Crockett controlled that room with nothing more than calm. Calculated truth. By the time Mike Johnson finally muttered something under his breath, the moment was already over. She had taken it, owned it. To find it and the world, both in that room and across every screen, knew exactly who had won. It didn't take long for the silence in that room to turn into noise everywhere, else clips of the exchange began spreading online within minutes. No flashy headlines, no fancy edits, just raw footage of Jasmine Crockett doing what most people only dream of doing. Standing her ground with elegance and power. The internet noticed. Viewers replayed the clip again and again. That moment where Johnson's confidence cracked, and Crockett's calm became the headline. People couldn't stop talking about it. Some called it the moment of the year. Others said it was a masterclass in composure. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. They had just witnessed a woman redefine what strength looks like in politics. Comment. Sections filled up with disbelief and admiration. Did she really just say that? She didn't even raise her voice. That's how you handle arrogance. News outlets scrambled to cover it. Commentators tried to spin it, explain it, soften it. But there was no way to rewrite what the cameras had already captured. Jasmine Crockett didn't just clap back. She flipped the narrative entirely. She turned an attempted humiliation into a moment of empowerment. And the best part? She didn't have to humiliate him back. Because real power doesn't shout. It resonates. Every replay, every reaction, every slow-motion clip only made the contrast clearer. Mike Johnson's frustration versus Crockett's effortless control. It was the difference between noise and wisdom. By the next day, the moment had become bigger than either of them. It wasn't just about a clash between two politicians. It was about a shift in tone, in balance, in energy. People saw what happens when intelligence refuses to shrink in the face of ego. They saw what happens when calm doesn't mean weak. It means in control. And Jasmine Crockett? She didn't post victory statements or give press quotes. She just kept moving forward. Because when you truly win, you don't have to announce it. Mike Johnson wanted to make a point. Instead, he made history, just not the kind he planned on. That day, one truth echoed across every screen. Confidence can be loud, but composure can be deafening. The next morning, every major network had something to say. Or at least, they tried to. Some anchors laughed it off, calling it just another heated exchange. Others couldn't hide their fascination. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's calm takedown played on repeat across screens nationwide. But while one side tried to downplay her, the other side couldn't stop praising her. It was the kind of media split that only happens when the truth hits a little too hard. Certain pundits insisted Johnson had been misunderstood. They used words like spirited debate and harmless banter, but viewers weren't buying it. They had seen the look on his face. They had heard the tone in her voice, and they knew exactly what had happened. Meanwhile, independent journalists and commentators didn't hold back. They called it a turning point, a rare moment when confidence and intelligence completely dismantled political arrogance, live on camera. And it wasn't just about the words. It was about the posture, the patience, the quiet power that spoke louder than any shouting match ever could. On morning talk shows, analysts replayed the moment frame by frame, trying to decode how she managed to keep her cool so flawlessly. But the answer was simple. She didn't need to perform. She just needed to be herself. Jasmine Crockett wasn't interested in scoring points. She was interested in setting standards. And as the media tried to spin narratives, something unexpected happened. People stopped listening to the pundits and started listening to her. Clips of her old speeches resurfaced. Interviews from years ago went viral. Viewers began to realize this wasn't a one-time event. It was a pattern. She had always been this sharp, this composed, this unshakably clear. While most politicians chase the spotlight, she let it find her naturally, through truth, through grace, through undeniable confidence. Even networks that rarely agreed on anything suddenly had one common topic: Jasmine Crockett. She had gone from being a target to becoming a voice. And the irony? Mike Johnson's attempt to discredit her only amplified her influence. Because the thing about underestimating a woman like Jasmine Crockett is that it never ends well for the one doing the underestimating. In the days that followed, something powerful began to unfold. Jasmine Crockett's name wasn't just trending. It was transforming. What started as a clip on social media became a statement, a symbol of something bigger than one argument or one headline. Across the country, people who had never paid attention to congressional hearings were suddenly tuning in. They weren't watching for drama. They were watching for her, because there was something magnetic about how she carried herself. No, shouting, no theatrics, no pandering, just truth delivered with precision. Commentators started calling it the Crockett effect. Young women saw her as proof that intelligence didn't need permission to take up space. Law students quoted her in classrooms. Even her critics, though they'd never admit it, started to tread more carefully. And while the noise around her kept growing, Crockett stayed exactly the same. Calm, focused, purposeful. In interviews, when asked about the exchange with Mike Johnson, she didn't gloat or attack. She simply said, "I don't believe in matching someone's energy when I can elevate the conversation instead." That line alone was enough to send shockwaves across every platform. Because in a world addicted to outrage, she chose discipline. In a culture of noise, she chose clarity. Supporters began to rally behind her, not just because she fought back, but because she did it without losing herself. Her social presence grew. Invitations poured in from panels, networks, and advocacy groups. And through it all, she kept redirecting the attention back to what mattered: policy, justice, representation. That's the thing about power. When you use it with restraint, it multiplies. Mike Johnson had wanted to test her. Instead, he helped reveal what made her unstoppable. Crockett didn't just win an exchange. She elevated her platform. She reminded people what leadership could look like when it's grounded in intelligence instead of ego. And slowly the narrative shifted. She wasn't being called a firebrand or a loud voice anymore. Now, she was being called something else entirely: formidable. In a world where politics had become theater, Jasmine Crockett brought back authenticity. And in doing so, she didn't just rise above the noise. She became the sound everyone wanted to hear. While Jasmine Crockett's voice echoed across the nation, Mike Johnson's went quiet. No statements, no interviews, no follow-ups. Just silence, the kind that doesn't come from peace, but from damage control. Behind the scenes, his team worked overtime, crafting excuses, rehearsing lines, searching for the right spin. But the truth doesn't need spin. And everyone had already seen what happened. Every clip, every headline, every comment thread told the same story. Mike Johnson underestimated the wrong woman. The man who once spoke with certainty now looked uncertain. His interviews felt rehearsed, his laughter forced. Because no matter how he tried to frame it, the world had already chosen the image it wanted to remember. The one where he was left speechless. And that's the thing about moments like these. They don't fade quietly. They stick. They replay. They define. Crockett didn't have to mention him again. She didn't need to. Every time she appeared on screen, people remembered the way she handled him. Not with anger, but with intelligence so sharp it cut through his facade. His silence became louder than any defense he could have given. Commentators noticed. Supporters grew restless. Even his usual allies avoided the topic altogether, afraid to reignite what had already become a PR disaster. He tried to pivot to new issues, new speeches, but the internet doesn't forget. Every clip, every edit, every quote lived on, circulating like a permanent reminder that sometimes the real loss isn't in the argument, it's in the aftermath. And in this aftermath, Johnson's confidence never fully returned. For years, he'd built his image on authority, commanding rooms, controlling narratives, dominating discussions. But this time, authority wasn't enough. Not against someone who fought with intellect instead of ego. The power dynamic had flipped, and everyone knew it. Crockett had moved on, already shaping her next conversation, already becoming the headline he could never escape. While Johnson, the man who once had the last word, now found himself defined by the one moment he couldn't talk his way out of. That's the cost of arrogance. It doesn't just embarrass you in the moment. It rewrites your reputation. And after that day, Mike Johnson wasn't the voice that silenced the room. He was the silence itself. When the noise faded and the headlines moved on, one truth still lingered. Some moments don't need the world's approval to matter. They just echo. Jasmine Crockett's confrontation with Mike Johnson wasn't about politics anymore. It was about presence, about what happens when intelligence meets arrogance and refuses to back down. Because this wasn't a shouting match. It was a masterclass in composure. A reminder that real strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and the world still listens. Crockett didn't win because she humiliated him. She won because she never let him change who she was. In a system built to reward noise, she proved that clarity still cuts deeper. And that's what makes her unforgettable. For generations, women have been told to soften their words, to stay polite, to avoid confrontation. But Crockett didn't soften. She sharpened. She stood there, unapologetically brilliant, and showed, everyone watching that respect isn't given. It's earned, word by word. She turned a moment of mockery into a lesson in mastery. Her silence, her poise, her confidence. They became symbols of what power looks like when it doesn't need validation. And Mike Johnson? He became the cautionary tale, proof that arrogance collapses when faced with intellect that refuses to bend. Because history doesn't remember who shouted the loudest. It remembers who spoke with purpose. Crockett's rise wasn't built on spectacle. It was built on substance. While others were chasing attention, she was commanding it. Not through volume, but through vision. And that's why her name stayed long after the headlines faded. Because she didn't just silence a man. She reminded millions of women watching that silence can be strength, and truth is its own kind of weapon. By the end of it all, one thing was clear. In a world full of noise, the calm voice of reason will always be the one people remember. So no, Jasmine Crockett didn't need to raise her voice that day. She just needed to be heard once. And that was enough to change everything. Because when intellect meets ego, when grace meets arrogance, and when truth stands its ground, the result isn't a debate. It's a reckoning. And Jasmine Crockett? She didn't just have the last word. She was the last word. Weeks turned into months, but the conversation never really ended. Every few days, a new headline surfaced, a new op-ed, a new analysis, dissecting, replaying, reinterpreting that single moment between Jasmine Crockett and Mike Johnson. It had become more than just a political exchange. It had become a cultural snapshot, a mirror reflecting exactly where power stood and how quickly it could shift. Mainstream networks tried to move on, but the public didn't let them. Every new panel or debate was measured against that same calm, precise energy Crockett had brought. She had set a new standard, not just for how to win an argument, but for how to own a moment without losing your integrity. Her words became case studies in communication classes. Her composure became a meme, not the kind that fades in a day, but the kind that lingers, quoted in captions and stitched into videos of other women standing their ground. It wasn't just what she said that resonated. It was how she said it, without raising her tone, without chasing validation, without ever forgetting her power. Meanwhile, Johnson's team tried to rebuild his image. He appeared on friendly platforms, repeating the same talking points. But every time he spoke, the audience remembered that silence, the one moment he couldn't talk his way through. Because reputations are fragile things. They can survive criticism, but they rarely survive clarity. And that's what Crockett had given the world, clarity. She didn't destroy him. She didn't need to. She revealed him. And once people see the truth, they don't unsee it. Over time, her influence only grew stronger. She became a symbol of composure under pressure, of how intellect can be a weapon sharper than any insult. And for young leaders watching from afar, she became proof that you don't need to change who you are to command respect. You just need to stop apologizing for it. It's ironic, really. The man who tried to question her worth ended up confirming it. The moment meant to embarrass her ended up empowering her, and the silence that followed became her loudest victory. Because when history looks back, it won't replay the mockery. It will replay the moment a woman used grace to expose arrogance and intelligence to redefine strength. And that, more than any headline, is what will last. The moment didn't just belong to politics anymore. It belonged to culture. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's calm takedown spread far beyond the political bubble. They landed on college group chats, corporate seminars, and women's empowerment conferences around the world. It wasn't about sides anymore. It was about standards. Because what she did that day spoke a universal language. The language of composure under fire, of refusing to shrink when someone tries to minimize your worth. Influencers quoted her. Professors played her video in lectures about debate ethics and media framing. Even late-night hosts, usually too cynical for sincerity, called her response the masterclass nobody saw coming. And through it all, Crockett stayed quiet. Not silent, just selective. She didn't ride the wave of fame. She shaped it. Her interviews weren't about what she said to Mike Johnson. They were about why women, especially women of color, are still forced to prove themselves twice to be heard once. And when she spoke on that, the world listened, because people saw themselves in her restraint. The kind of strength that doesn't scream to be noticed, but commands attention the moment it walks into the room. Meanwhile, a quiet shift began online. Comment sections that once mocked were now filled with gratitude. Finally, one wrote, someone who didn't just clap back. She taught a lesson. And that's when it became clear. This wasn't just a viral clip. It was a cultural checkpoint. An entire generation of young women, future lawyers, journalists, and leaders began referencing Crockett not as a moment, but as a mindset. A reminder that dignity isn't weakness, that being unbothered is not being unaware, and that real power doesn't come from volume, it comes from precision. Her words traveled further than any broadcast could have predicted, and while Johnson's moment of silence faded into a footnote, Crockett's composure turned into a movement. That's how legacies are born, not from noise, but from the echo of grace that refuses to die down. So when history revisits that exchange, it won't be remembered as the day Mike Johnson spoke. It will be remembered as the day Jasmine Crockett didn't have to shout to be heard. And that truth, that calm, cutting truth, is what changed everything. The cameras turned off that day, but the echo didn't. For Mike Johnson, silence became a shadow he couldn't shake. Every time he appeared on camera after that, there was hesitation, a flicker of self-awareness that hadn't been there before. It's the look of a man who suddenly realizes not every spotlight flatters. His team tried damage control. Interviews were rescheduled. His publicist whispered, "Stay composed, stay collected." But the internet doesn't forget. Every clip, every meme, every remix of that moment reminded the world of a single truth. The man who once mocked got mastered. And while his feeds turned quiet, Jasmine Crockett's didn't. Her face filled headlines, not as a controversy, but as a case study. Analysts called her the new face of composure. Podcasts replayed her words on loop. Commentators debated, was it planned or pure instinct? But to anyone really listening, it didn't matter. Because Crockett hadn't come to win an argument. She came to reclaim respect. And she did. Behind the scenes, invitations poured in. Universities wanted her as a guest speaker. Advocacy groups asked her to headline their campaigns. And young women across America sent messages that all said the same thing. Thank you for showing that calm can be power. She didn't brag, didn't gloat, didn't post a single quote about it. Instead, she doubled down on her work. Policy, reform, education, every move deliberate, every word measured. Because when you've already proven your point, you don't need to repeat it. Meanwhile, Johnson's political circle grew tense. Colleagues stopped defending him on air. Late-night jokes turned brutal, and every attempt to move on somehow circled back to the same clip, the look on his face when the room froze. The aftershock wasn't loud. It was lingering, the kind that hums in the background of every conversation, reminding everyone who really walked away in control. And if you listen closely, even now, that silence still speaks louder than anything he's said since. Because moments fade, but impact stays. Crockett didn't just end a debate. She changed the energy of the room, and maybe, just maybe, the balance of who gets to hold the mic. Some moments don't just make headlines, they make history. What happened between Mike Johnson and Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another viral clip. It was a reminder that intellect, grace, and composure are louder than arrogance could ever be. Because Crockett didn't just win a debate, she redefined it. She showed the world that strength doesn't need to shout, and power doesn't always wear a suit and tie. Sometimes it walks in wearing confidence, wrapped in calm, sharpened by experience. When Johnson tried to mock her, he didn't realize he was opening a door, one that led straight to his own undoing. Every smirk, every interruption became fuel for a moment she turned into mastery. And when she spoke, she didn't speak at him. She spoke through him. To every person who's ever been talked over, dismissed, or doubted for being too bold, too confident, too smart. That was the moment intelligence struck back, and arrogance fell silent. Since then, clips of that exchange have become more than internet content. They've become evidence. Proof that the new generation of leadership doesn't come from privilege. It comes from preparation. And Jasmine Crockett? She didn't just silence a man. She set a standard, because here's the truth. Anyone can raise their voice. But very few can raise the conversation. In a world addicted to outrage, she reminded us of something rare, that calm is not weakness. It's control. That silence is not surrender. It's strategy. And that intelligence, when used right, doesn't just answer back. It evolves the dialogue. So the next time someone like Mike Johnson laughs off a degree, a voice, or a woman's worth, maybe they'll think twice, because the world's watching. And this time, it remembers who walked away unshaken. Pause. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about revelation. A revelation that no amount of bluster can hide insecurity, and no attempt at mockery can erase merit. Jasmine Crockett didn't demand respect. She earned it, the hard way, through study, through service, through self-control. And as the echoes of that exchange still ripple through screens and feeds, one thing remains clear. Power is shifting. Not to the loudest voice in the room, but to the one that knows when to speak. And when to let silence do the talking. Beat drop. Slow outro. I'm your host. And if this story reminded you that real power doesn't need validation, stay tuned, because this isn't the last time arrogance meets its match.